you would be dumb to try to go through the legal immigration route, because that could take you 10 years. Versus if you come through the southern border, you'll get a phone, you'll get housing. So it's really rewarding bad behavior.
Yes.
Keeping our republic is on the line, and it requires patriots with great passion, dedication, and eternal vigilance to preserve our freedoms. Jenny Beth Martin is the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. She is an author, a filmmaker, and one of Time Magazine's most influential people in the world. But the title she is most proud of is mom to her boy-girl twins. She has been at the forefront, fighting to protect America's core principles for more than a decade. Welcome to the Jenny Beth Show.
If you've been following the election integrity issues in Arizona, you've probably heard the name Abe Hamadeh. Abe is an attorney who served in the Army before running for Attorney General in Arizona in 2022, where he quote-unquote lost by 280 votes. As he continues to fight for the integrity of that election in the courts, he has embarked on a campaign for U.S. Congress. Abe, you have been sanctioned $55,000 for challenging the election, which they say you lost by 280 votes, and yet you're not giving up, and you're still going forward with election contests. Why are you continuing to do that, and what do you think about being sanctioned like that?
Well, I think every Arizonan knows what happened last November when you had the printers going down. You had in Pinal County the results being off, which shrunk the deficit from 511 to 280. We have a crisis in this country with our elections. And it's been over a year, just about a year since we filed our first election lawsuit. And I think what's happening right now, being sanctioned $55,000 by the Supreme Court, which are Republican appointed, all of them are Republican appointed justices. To me, it's highlighting the fact that every single Arizonan knows in their gut that our system, there's something wrong with our system. And I'm exposing it, and I continue to fight this. Because if we had a fair trial, we would win. I mean, what happened last year when the government withheld the evidence from us? They withheld the provisional ballots. They withheld the recount discrepancies. And we went into trial with no evidence. And I'm a former prosecutor. I'm a former Army intelligence officer. I took my oath to the Constitution. I take that very seriously. And, I'm fighting for the people still. Their votes were taken from them, and we got to make sure that the remaining 9,000 ballots are counted. And I'm enjoying this process in many ways. It's because although I'll take all the arrows, it's eye-opening, not just for me, but for the people. And we need to show them how corrupt the system really is and what the government thinks of them. And they have contempt for the people. And having me fight this and Carrie Lake fighting her lawsuits, it's really highlighting the fact that there are fighters out there that care about our country, that care about the people. So we're continuing our lawsuits, and we will. There's still a shot, I will say, but I think with them sanctioning us, them denying our expedited appeal, which is very unusual. Carrie Lake got an expedited appeal back in January, so they denied us an expedited appeal just last month in October. So if you think about that, and why would they do that? This is the closest race in Arizona history, with the biggest recount discrepancy in Arizona history, where they removed a sitting governor before when they were found not to have the most votes. So we're doing everything by the book. And when you do everything by the book and you have the system go against it, it exposes how corrupt the system really is. Okay, let's unpack just a little bit about what you said for people who may be listening not from Arizona and don't know all the details. Mm-hmm. And we'll go backwards. So first, Arizona has removed a sitting governor before. What happened with that? Well, back in 1917, there was a gubernatorial race where there is issues. I think the vote total was about 50 out of 80,000 votes. That was the final victory. But if you actually look at it, our race is closer. I mean, 280 out of 2.5 million. Right. And it took about a year of litigation. And back then, Arizona only had 2-year governor terms, actually. So the person that entered office already expended, a year of that office. The legal precedent in Arizona is actually to remove a statewide or an elected official if it's deemed that they did not receive the most votes. Under our Constitution, the person who receives the most votes is entitled to that office, and that can never be taken away from them. So that's where the system, the legal system right now is having a real hard time trying to unwrap everything that we've done with our lawsuits, because if they followed the law, we would get a new trial, which would then prove that there were votes that were not counted that should have been counted. So that's why we're continuing this fight.
And then the votes that are not counted, the 9,000 votes that have not been counted, and then the drop in votes that you were talking about, explain that, because the withholding of evidence.
Sure. So November 8th, 2022 was a disaster, Jenny Beth. You know it.
Was.
Everybody knows it.
I saw the videos that day before the polls closed, and I was texting Floyd Brown with Western Journal saying, it doesn't matter who is deemed the winner. This election needs to be completely redone.
Yeah.
Whether it's a Republican or Democrat who wins, these are massive problems that undermine the integrity in the election.
There were some lines that were 5 hours long, and they didn't extend the voting hours. Just think about that. I mean, how deep is this corruption where they didn't extend the most basic thing to extend voting hours because the printer is going down, because the tabulations machines weren't working. And that was just Maricopa. So when we're talking about the deficit shrinking from 511 to 280, that came out of Pinal County. And Pinal County, this was during their recount. So they discovered their ES&S machines that were tabulating votes was having undervotes in the attorney general race. So an undervote is where a ballot is for some reason it's showing that they didn't vote in that race. And it turned out that wasn't the case. So they were looking at it by hand and said, no, there's actually legitimate votes. And think about how much of a deficit shrink it was. 511 to 280, that means we were winning overwhelmingly to get to that number. And unfortunately at the time, Katie Hobbs, this then Secretary of State, refused to give this information to my legal team, to the courts, which is exculpatory evidence. And the 9,000 provisional ballots, half of them are from Maricopa County. We were asking for the provisional ballots prior to the trial, and they refused to give it to us. And when they did finally give it to us was a week after trial. Can you imagine? They withheld all of this evidence prior to our trial in December, and they gave it to us after trial. And then that's when the recount results came out, and that's when we filed our motion for a new trial, and we continued our lawsuit, and we're still in litigation. We're in the Court of Appeals now, but it's really, I want the viewers to know this isn't just a Democrat issue. This is Republicans, the establishment Republicans who oppose election integrity. They want to act like, our elections are perfect. They are not. It's been proven. Connecticut just issued a new election over there with that mayoral race. Pennsylvania, you saw the ES&S machines actually just recently where it was not casting the proper vote. So there's a big problem with our elections, and it takes people with courage and who are fearless to acknowledge it and to say what needs to be said. So that's why we're fighting it, but we're going up against the machine, and I'm honored to be doing it actually.
Well, I'm really glad that you are. And we need people who have the courage to say, I know this is wrong and I'm standing for what is right. Right. And so you're doing that with the election from last year, but you also are running for Congress for 2024. Why do you decide to run for Congress?
Well, it's actually interesting. You first started off with the $55,000 in sanctions. That day was the exact same day that I decided to announce for Congress. It was the same day that we had a retirement from Debbie Lesko. And it was at that moment I said, when they sanction us, these people, they're not going to do the right thing. No. So we're going to get justice another way. I believe the ultimate arbiters of justice are the people. It's not the courts, it's the people. And they need a fighter. Congressional District 8 was hit hardest with the election issues in Maricopa last year. They know the lines were long. They know that the printers went down. So you look at what's going on. When I got involved, when I first ran for office for Attorney General, I tell people, I was the last candidate in that race. And now for this race, I was the first candidate in. And it's, partly due why I was the last candidate. I just returned from my overseas deployment to Saudi Arabia. I'm in the United States Army Reserve, and I served for 14 months over there. And I came back and I looked, I don't recognize our country in just such a short amount of time. And everybody has that feeling right now. Right. We feel it in our gut. I mean, how we're talking about transgenders like we've never talked about before. We can't even define what a woman is. We're looking at our border that's completely open. We're looking at elections that are a complete mess, and our foreign policy that's a disaster. In such a short amount of time, which I believe it's done intentionally, our country is collapsing. The value of our dollar has decreased by 23% in 3 years. I mean, this is republic ending stuff. And the Marxists, and we got to call them out what they are. This isn't the Tip O'Neill Democrats of the 80s. This is unusual what's happening. And unfortunately, you have too many Republicans who I believe are weak-kneed. And I think it's time Congress, finally gets its act together. We need fighters. That's why, Carrie Lake running for Senate, and I'm honored to have her endorsement. Because she called me on that day. She said, Abe, I need you in Washington with me. And President Trump needs us. And I think that's exactly the message I'm going to take to Washington is the people of Arizona know I'm a fighter. We've had the whole system come against us, and we've stood tall and strong. And, that's exactly what D.C. needs. D.C. unfortunately has contempt for the people. And what D.C. lacks right now is common sense, conviction, and courage. And those three things I'm going to bring to the halls of Congress when I get elected next year.
Arizona has 3 congressmen who really do fight in Washington, D.C. right now. We need another one up there who would fight from Arizona.
Absolutely. We need Carrie Lake in the Senate, too. It's people look at Arizona as a bellwether, right? I mean, we're on the front lines of so many battles. Election integrity, to 2020, what we discovered with the audits and everything that went wrong in 2022, but also our border. The border is completely open, and I don't know if you've had a chance to go down there.
Yeah.
It's people from all over the world are flocking there. And the Biden administration, Kamala Harris, I think this is intentional. And I think we have to start saying that to the American people, that the Democrats have destroyed every single city they've touched, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and they're destroying our country right now very quickly. So, I tell people the Marxists are not at the gates. They've breached the gates. And now we have to fight back with everything we've got, because I think 2024 is an all or nothing type of election. And I'm glad President Trump he's got a lot of stamina and he's fearless. And I think that's the type of personality we need right now, when we need people to recognize that we're at war. And we need fighters who are going to fight for the American people who've had their voices silenced by the political class for too long.
What are the things you would what kind of legislation would you want to pass in Washington, D.C.?
Well, first is election integrity. And I say that because when Democrats take control, remember Nancy Pelosi, the first thing they did is H.R. 1. Remember that?
Yes.
And what we need to do is we need to ban ranked choice voting at the federal level for any office, for Senate or for House of Representatives. No ranked choice voting. We would get Sarah Palin elected in Congress up in Alaska. California would have a lot more in play. And so that's one of the first things I want to focus on. And hopefully when Carrie Lake in the Senate and Trump in the White House, we're going to get these legislations not only passed, but signed into law. And reforming the voter rolls. We got to clean up the voter rolls. We know it's a mess. Here in Arizona, there was a study that just said there's, I think, 72,000 illegal immigrants on our voting rolls. Can you imagine that? A free country like ours has illegal immigrants on our voting rolls? And then the propagandists say, well, we don't know if they voted or not. That's the whole point. It's like they shouldn't be on our voting rolls. So election integrity is one of my top issues, truly. And I think it's fair to say why it is, because I've witnessed it and the people here have witnessed it. But the border is also absolutely critical, because what's going on at the border is a disaster. It's not a crisis. It's a disaster. And it's a national security threat. When I was serving overseas, I recognized how these terrorists, when they always go after Trump when he says our enemy is smart. They are smart. What do you think they're going to try to come in? They're going to come in through our southern border. It doesn't take a rocket science to notice that. And it's not just radical Islamists. It's also the Chinese. The Chinese are taking advantage of us really, in a scary way right now. And the fentanyl that's being poured in. And it all ties into China, remember. China is sending the fentanyl to the drug cartels, which should be labeled a terrorist organization, which I want to work in D.C. to label them as such. They're bringing the fentanyl through the drug cartels into the United States and poisoning children at the schools. And it's not just in the cities. This is in rural communities, in the suburbs. So it's very scary. But then you look at the rise of inflation. It's so hard to make a living in this country anymore. If you look at the studies, a majority of Americans believe the American dream is dead. And what kind of society have we become if that's what Americans believe? And I think I think they're right. I think it's hard to make a living under the Biden administration. And you look at the grocery stores and you look at the spending that the government has done has risen our inflation to this level. And we need people in D.C. to recognize the position we're at. And it took us decades to get us into this mess. It's going to take us a while, but we got to start from somewhere.
Okay, so with the border, one of the things that you were just saying, I spent a lot of time on the border this summer, and I talked to sheriffs and Border Patrol, and the Biden administration is doing this in two different ways. First, basically, if you go through the port of entry, you're being granted asylum, whether you should be granted asylum or not. They're just letting everybody in through the port of entry. But then what you were just saying about the people who are coming in, like from China or Iran or Russia, those were the countries of special interest that sheriffs were pointing out to me. They said, those are the people who are coming in illegally because they know they could go in legally, but they don't want our government to know they're here. That is alarming to me. So it's happening in two different ways. Everyone can go through, and then they know people are coming through illegally. There's like breaching the border, not going through an entry point.
Right.
And either way, it's harming our country and it's breaking our laws. And I just said, it makes me sick. And it worries me. And every time I leave the Phoenix airport at night, and I've been to Phoenix a good bit because you're right, Arizona is on the front line. I see people on getting on the flights who are coming through with a grocery bag and papers in their hand and a phone. Exactly. And they do not look like normal American travelers. And they don't look like normal tourists or international tourists. They look like people who went over the border with the clothes on their back, and it's alarming to me. Yeah.
Well, the Border Patrol has sadly become a travel agency for the illegals, and you're exactly right. It's multi-pronged approach where you have people, there are people who they're trying to bypass the immigration system, and they're trying to get to this country because America is the most prosperous country on earth, right? But then and they come through the port of entries, and they don't get a court case for 6 years. So they're in this country for 6 years on the government dole. They're getting housing, they're getting phones. And so you have those people. And then you have the people, the gotaways is what they classify them as, going through the desert, right, and paying extra money by the cartels. And we had 169 people on the terror watch list enter our country in the last fiscal year. Under President Trump, in 2020, it was 0. So those are just the ones that we know of, by the way. And so imagine the gotaways, the ones who have evaded law enforcement. And you look at 9/11, and the 9/11 terrorists, they were here legally on student visas. So imagine who's trying to avoid law enforcement, whether it's Chinese spies, whether it's radical Islamist terrorists, whether it's Russians. They're here for nefarious purposes. Right. And we have to be on guard right now. And that's why it's so sickening to see this administration. Secretary Mayorkas needs to be impeached. And it's 100%. Shocking that he hasn't been impeached. Right. It's a disaster and it's a failure. But when Trump gets back in there, we got to finish the wall. We've got to deport. Millions of people have come into this country. And in fact, I don't know if you saw, but in New York, you're seeing a lot of these illegal immigrants are actually self-deporting back to their country because they're saying, actually, they kind of have the same sentiment that Americans have. The American dream is, no longer attainable. So they even themselves. So they were never legitimate asylum seekers. They're going back to their country of origin. And, our government, unfortunately, people in our government are stupid. And we have to start bringing back common sense to D.C. because any country on earth, if you try to go into Mexico, we will see that the government will quickly not allow you in, or they will deport you very quickly.
You have to have papers to get into Mexico. You have to have papers if you're flying through airports in this country. Right. And if you're coming in on an international flight, but somehow across the southern border, all of those rules just go right out the window.
Right. It's the drug cartels run the southern border. They're a terrorist organization. And it's not just fentanyl they're bringing in. They're doing the human trafficking, which is
just awful.
I mean, any person who supports women's rights should understand what they're doing right now is so it's really destroying the culture of our country. I mean, human trafficking in Arizona is one of the worst across the country. And it's it's a humanitarian disaster, and we have to start calling it out for what it is. And anybody who's been to the border understands. I mean, you see, I think when I was down there, you had 50 countries represented, from India, Pakistan, China, every single country, Africa, it's unbelievable. And in many ways, you can't blame them. You're blaming the policies that have led them to come into it, because you've advertised the world that the border's open. And of course, they're going to come across.
And they're flying to Mexico to come through the southern border because they know if they fly into America, they wouldn't be able to get in.
Right.
Which is warped. It's just completely warped.
Imagine if you're an immigrant wanting to come to the United States to make the American dream, and you want to do it the right way.
Right.
Through legal immigration. You would be dumb to try to go through the legal immigration route, because that could take you 10 years. Versus if you come through the southern border, you'll get a phone, you'll get housing. So it's really rewarding bad behavior.
Yes.
And that is what I'm so frightened of right now, is this government it's upside down land during the COVID times, and we can't forget COVID. I mean, there's been no accountability for what they've done to us. So, people are witnessing it. I mean, it's only been 3 years with this Biden administration, but they're quickly realizing that the Democrats are Marxists. And the rise of Marxism in this country at the university levels, I mean, you're seeing this anti-Israel protests all across the country, and it's despicable. The pro-Hamas caucus with Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush. I mean, these people, they're hostile to the United States, and they're hostile to Israel. And it's very scary what we're witnessing. But what I equate this is the Marxists, they use the media as their propaganda arm. They use the universities as their indoctrination camps. And right now, it appears that they're using BLM, Antifa, radical Islamists as their military wing. And this is what we're fighting right now. It's Marxism that has taken a hold. And this is what Reagan talked about. I've listened to his A Time for Choosing speech in 1964. It's exactly what he talked about is coming true today.
Right. He warned against it, but now it's happening. Talking about Israel, and also talking about, you said that we need to look at deporting people who have been here illegally. You are not xenophobic, and your family is actually a family of immigrants, right?
Right.
And you came here and your family lived the American dream.
Right. We were on food stamps. It's interesting where the media, they've called me all sorts of names. Election denier. They've called me a white supremacist. Can you believe that? And that's why I just look at them as a bunch of fools.
Right.
And Elon Musk, you saw his interview, earlier, when he went after them. It's people are waking up. Right. They're waking up. There's alternative media, this podcast, there's, Twitter now, there's Rumble. It's people are not dumb. They can see it with their own eyes what's happening. And for me, why I'm fighting so hard is because my family came from Syria. I was born in Chicago and came to Arizona when I was 6. But I have family from Syria. I have family from Venezuela. I've seen when the Marxists take over how quickly, once they activate their army, and that's what I say. It's like this took us decades to get into it, but these people just activated their army here. And once they activate it, things go bad very quickly.
Very.
And it's good. And look at them. Venezuela is still under that regime. Syria, same thing. So I've seen it with my own eyes. I have skin in the game. And if the flame of freedom is extinguished in the United States, I believe it may be extinguished forever.
We can't let that happen. We owe it to the people who went before us that gave us freedom to honor the gift that they gave us, and we owe it to future generations to make sure that they have the opportunity to live under what we've lived under. And it's not just preserving it for Americans, but it's a beacon. Yeah. It's a beacon of hope and light for the rest of the world. But if we can't live by that example, we are no beacon. We're no better than any other. We wind up being no better than any other country. And we're the greatest country there ever has been.
Right. And that's why they're attacking us so effectively right now, because the Marxist revolution concept really requires this global revolution. And there's pushback, though. That's why I have optimism. There's hope. I mean, we saw in Argentina with that election. That was really great to see. And he said he's going to get rid of the central bank.
Yes, he's going to get rid of a lot. Gone.
You saw it in the Netherlands. Yes. You see it in Italy. The people are rising. Ireland, you just saw those protests. They understand what's happening. The people really do. And that's why election integrity matters, because I think if we have real legitimate, fair elections, we would be winning by a bigger margin. I've served overseas, with the United States Army. We spread democracy, right? That's what we were doing for a while. And you remember those images and videos of Afghans or Iraqis dipping their finger in ink and voting that way. And they're so proud to vote. And here, we don't even know if our machines are going to work. And this is the greatest country and supposed to be the most sustainable democracy in the world. And we have this much problems with our elections. We have illegals on the voter rolls. We have the machines that are somewhat compromised. We have mail-in ballots that we don't know. I mean, when I got back from serving overseas, Jenny Beth, I had 4 mail-in ballots at my house, and they were not in my name. They were from previous tenants or previous owners. So when people tell me I can't talk about election integrity, I'm like, what? I'm just telling the truth. Right. And that's what I did as a prosecutor. That's what I've done, as an Army officer. So it's when you speak the truth, you're really liberated. And that's what I'm always committed to doing.
You mentioned Israel. What do you think about the situation that's going on in Israel? And do you think that we're seeing more from the leftists, even regarding how they're treating Israel and standing up for Hamas?
And I think it's been eye-opening for a lot of people, where October 6th was peaceful, right? In Israel and the Palestinian territories, and then October 7th is when you had Hamas brutally massacred 1,400 innocent people and take them hostage.
Including children and Americans.
Right. And I've been to Israel. I've been to Lebanon. I've been to all over the region. And what's happening right now is very scary. And there's a lot of propaganda that's going on where, if you want to look at this conflict, and I know this conflict better than most, 2005, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon forcibly removed 8,000 Jewish settlers in Gaza. Remove them because he wanted to unilaterally, say, well, we'll give you back this land. We're going to remove them from it, and you guys can self-govern. And what happened? They elected Hamas, and they then started firing missiles and rockets, and it's been like that for 16 years. So we have to start understanding that Hamas they want this conflict to go on because their leadership is getting rich in Qatar. They're flush with cash, and it's mafia driven. They don't care about the people of that they're supposed to be governing, and the brainwashing is real out there. I mean, you have generations of people in Gaza who believe that Israel's their enemy and that Jews are the enemy. So it's going to take them a long time to get out of it. And President Trump, he did the most for peace, not just in the Middle East, across the world. He moved the capital, the embassy, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The whole establishment class thought that was going to bring on World War III. And he did it because he was decisive. And what else did he do? Brought the Abraham Accords. And I was there serving in Saudi Arabia at the time. And I remember talking to some Saudis, and they were all excited about this. They want relations with Israel, especially the higher levels of the government. And he didn't get any credit for that. No Nobel Peace Prize, nothing. Right. I mean, you had, the United Arab Emirates, you had Bahrain, you had Sudan, you had Morocco, all make peace with Israel. This is probably one of the greatest accomplishments in foreign policy history. On top of that, he killed Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander. Remember when he killed him in Iraq, when he was on the battlefield? And all the Democrats were screaming, saying this is going to cause World War III. No, it didn't. President Trump knew to put the interests of the American people first. And he kept the world at peace because of his leadership. So I'm looking at Israel right now. I see Biden sending mixed signals because I think Biden has a big problem that these people on campuses where they're openly attacking Jews, it's very scary. A big contingent at the Democratic Party has become anti-Israel, pro-Hamas. And Biden's trying to grapple with that right now because they view everything in terms of the lens of politics. So it's scary, and I think right now we have to show our support and a strong commitment for Israel, because what Israel's fighting is what we could be fighting here in the United States with our wide open border, and it's shocking to see them trying to force them to do hostage negotiations, to
the ceasefire,
talk. Right, and to delay invasions. They're really hamstringing Israel, and it's tough because Israel is the one beacon of hope in the Middle East, and you have the whole region basically at war. I mean, you have the Houthis in Yemen firing rockets, not just at Israel, but now at U.S. Military ships. So this Biden administration is a disaster. Ukraine, Russia. Russia never invaded, any country under Trump. He invaded Crimea under Obama. He invaded eastern Ukraine under Biden. So the world is taking advantage of our weakness. And remember, Jenny Beth, why I'm so focused, because I'm looking at the world right now. They're not stupid. They're going to take advantage. We had a spy balloon fly across our country just in February, all across the country. Biden didn't shoot it down.
No, what did he do? He brought the Chinese president to America and
red
had
carpet.
dinner with it. Right.
Yeah, and cleaned up the streets of San Francisco for once.
Like a Potemkin village, even. It's disgusting.
It shows you who's really running the show. And the Chinese are actually, the communist Chinese are very scary. But the Chinese spy balloon that came across, then you had these secret police stations they had set up. But some people, people are not talking about the bioweapons lab that was discovered in California. But the only reason why it was discovered was a maintenance worker discovered that there was water to the building that shouldn't have been connected. And they had ability to create viruses in California, in our backyard. And yet we're capitulating to the Chinese. We're rolling out the red carpet.
In the state where they had it makes no sense.
And, there's a good quote from Napoleon: never interrupt your enemy while it's defeating itself. And that's what China is doing. They're just allowing this situation. They fan the flames here and there, but they're not interfering in all of this. They're taking a step back and watching it all occur before they know when to strike.
You mentioned the Hamas and the brainwashing that is going on in Gaza. I had the opportunity, I guess that is the right word, I was invited to watch the unedited video that the Israeli government is showing media and key leaders around the world. And it was 45 minutes long. It was... I expected to see a lot of what I was seeing because I had seen bits and pieces here and there, but what I did not expect was to be in a room that was completely darkened where you're watching a big, huge screen and you hear everything. So I heard things that I was not prepared to hear, like children who watch their father die. And their emotion immediately after that, it was gut-wrenching, and it's something that I don't think I can ever forget. Ever. And one of the respondents from the Israeli military at the concert, after the concert, it was sort of like the scene in the Titanic, in the movie Titanic, where they're yelling, "Is anyone alive? Is anyone here?" They were saying, "Is there any sign of life? Any sign of life at all?" Because everywhere he turned, there were children, young adults who are my children's age, so they look like kids to me, but they're in their 20s, who had been just slaughtered from Hamas. Those things were awful. The thing that shocked me the absolute most is the footage of the terrorists going back to Gaza, and they were being welcomed as if it was a parade. They were being cheered. The people wanted to touch the bodies in the back of the truck. They were getting a better greeting than Taylor Swift could get anywhere in the entire world. And they were proud of what these terrorists had just done. And I watched that thinking, I don't know how you even overcome that, because there's so much hatred there towards Israel in cheering of the murder of innocent children and civilians. It's just, I don't know how we overcome that brainwashing. Yeah, you're right. It's going to take a long time.
And look at the Hamas terrorists. They had GoPros. They wanted to record this. They wanted to
body cams.
Yeah, they wanted to inflict terror on the people. But it's tough, right? This is generational. You look at Nazi Germany when they committed the Holocaust. Germans were able to get out of that propaganda and out of that brainwashing. But, the Nazi regime didn't last as long as how long the Hamas terrorists and how long this hatred has been built up for probably 70 years. So it's more difficult than even say post World War II and when we had the Germany back, and that took time. This is going to take a lot of time, but it's also going to take. We have to finish Hamas off. I mean, we have to crush them. Israel has to crush them, and Israel has every capability to do so.
And any other terrorists that are funded by Iran or that want to cause harm to the terroristic kind of harm,
right?
They have to be destroyed.
Absolutely, and I think we always have to pick our priorities right now. And Israel's main priorities, they have two objectives in Gaza: to free the hostages and to eradicate Hamas and take out their leadership in Qatar, take out their leadership in the Gaza Strip. And it's going to take a lot of time to rebuild that civil society, if it's even possible, so that they can. I mean, if you look at the amount of billions of dollars that have been sent to the Palestinians, whether it's in Gaza or whether it's the West Bank, they could have a thriving society now. And remember, Jared Kushner and President Trump, they offered a peace deal, a two-state solution that was rejected by the Palestinians. And it was actually going to expand the Palestinian territories. But this is unfortunately what we're having. It's the terrorists at the leadership level are profiting off of this war. And they want this to continue because they're enriching themselves. And we have to understand what we're up against. And it has an ability to come to the United States. And unfortunately, I think it already is here. I mean, not even just foreigners. I mean, look at the Marxists on our universities. They're sympathetic. They're sympathetic to Hamas. It's mind-boggling. And I think they should show the footage that you saw to a lot more people.
Yeah.
Because I think the truth, will actually, set you free and maybe, take away this brainwashing that they've been put on at these universities.
And I think that some of the people who are at the universities, college students tend to be peace-oriented. That has happened over the years since well before I was born. And they're seeing the footage of civilians in Gaza being killed, and it's heart-wrenching. I don't want to see that either. And Hamas caused it, and Hamas is putting their military in civilian situations. And Israel has to defend itself. Hamas is the cause. It isn't Israel who is the cause. And they just don't, I think some don't understand it, and some just are anti-Semitic.
Right. They don't understand warfare. They don't understand, I do think there's a lot of anti-Semitism going around, a lot, actually. I have a friend in Vegas. She was dropping her kids off at school, and it on the outside said, "Free Gaza, kill the Jews." I would be so scared to be wearing a yarmulke on campus right now.
Wow.
I mean, you're seeing teachers getting harassed if they have any sympathy for Israel. It's shocking, but it shouldn't surprise people. This is what decades of Marxist indoctrination does to people. It creates a victim class, a supposed victim class, and it goes from oppressor to victim. It's the exact same mentality. So it's weird, right? Where you have the LGBT community suddenly waving the Palestinian flags and being pro-Hamas. It's very unusual, but this is Marxism is filled with contradictions for a reason.
It is extremely unusual, and it is so alarming to watch this happen. And it's why November of 2024 is so extremely important. We have to win, and even then, our work isn't done. It just begins.
Yes, exactly. It took us decades to get us into this mess. It's going to take us decades to get us out, but we have to start somewhere. But I also have hope, because when President Trump took office in 2016, that was the biggest shock to the system. And when those 4 years, I mean, he did transform this country, and he awakened a lot of people. So now imagine what he can do in the next 4 years. And that's why it's so critical that he wins, and that we recapture the Senate and increase our majorities in Congress, but not just with Republicans, with strong America First Republicans that are unafraid to say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done.
Right.
I'm on a mission. I'm 32 years old. I was the youngest statewide candidate running for attorney general at 30. And nobody took us seriously back then. And I won the votes because I went to the people. They understand. They know what authenticity is. They know who's genuine. And this is my generation's fight in many ways. I'm going to have to live with the consequences of my decisions for a long time. And I refuse to be known as a generation that lost America. We're going to be known as a generation that saved our country.
It's very important that happens. Let me ask you one other thing that you mentioned for why you're running for Congress. You talked about inflation. What do you think needs to be done to address inflation and the economy?
Well, I think the out-of-control spending, I mean, ever since COVID times, it's just, that's what happens when you feed the beast, right? They're never going to roll back. You set the baseline higher and higher, and that's what's going on. And who benefited the most from the COVID policies? It was the corporations. And if you look at the top earners, how much their net worth has increased, and versus the middle class and the people who are struggling, it's decreased. So that is tackling inflation is going to take a long time, but it's the Federal Reserve and their manipulation of our currency is a big deal. Auditing the Federal Reserve is something that I've been an advocate for a very long time, but it's going to take courage because it's going to require us to maybe not send $130 billion to Ukraine and maybe use some of that money at our border. But I want to make sure that people know I'm a big believer that if you make a promise, you keep that promise. And for Social Security, Medicare, we've promised these people. Why are we going to, some Republicans even advocate cutting it for these folks who are just entering their retirement age. I mean, that is something that I believe we cannot touch. We have to honor our commitments to the people. But unfortunately, right now, the Democrats, everybody wants to spend money. They all love it. But this is where we have to start rolling back some of the spending that we've seen increase during the COVID times. I mean, we don't even know, if you look at the trillions of dollars that went through some of these loans, the PPP, the Small Business Administration, it was ripe with fraud, and there has to be accountability for it. But the inflation crisis, I think, opening up our energy independence will be one of the main driving factors to hopefully revitalize this economy. It's what President Trump did during his time, and it's something we can bring back very quickly because the United States we're so blessed to have the amount of natural resources we've got, and to see this green energy deal that they're trying to push on us, it's going to lead to an economic disaster, and it already is in California. And it's what Elon Musk, quite frankly says. This is society committing suicide. And that's what the Green Deal does, and the Democrat policies have done. San Francisco. I mean, what? look at the reason why prices are going up. Maybe also has to do with organized retail theft. When you start going in and bashing these stores and stealing all these items, it's going to lead to increasing in pricing. So it's very scary. But the wages, it's weird, right? Where you have minimum wage in this country basically has, de facto increased to about $15. And you can get $15 working at McDonald's really easily. But what does that get you? You're still not going to be getting the American dream because the value of the dollar has collapsed, and the prices of homes. When you have corporations gobbling up all these single-family residences, and it's not just corporations here, it's foreign corporations. So it's crushing the American dream right now. So we have to understand what's actually going on in order to fix it.
What do you think is more important, spending cuts or tax cuts?
Well, I think, honestly, it's probably, this is a cop-out, it's probably a mix of both. But I think spending is obvious, especially during this time. Spending cuts is the most critical. I mean, $33 trillion in debt, and it's going up exponentially, and the interest payments are going to come. So, but tax cuts have a big benefit because it does allow the people to have more money that they're able to then spend in the economy, which then hopefully drives the prices down. But the spending, if you want to look at a tier, I think it should be much more spending cuts right now. But we got to drive the taxes are insane in this country. I mean, you have foreigners that come here and they laugh. They say, "Oh, they take away 50% of your money," and it's true. But the reason why is because they're trying to fund these wars in Ukraine and all these overseas ventures. But it's got to be a multi-pronged approach. And I think once we're able to once we're able to take back the White House, President Trump knows what needs to be done. He's seen it on, just like I've seen it with the election stuff I've been fighting. I know who the phonies are. I know who the crooks are. We know what needs to be done come next November in order to right this ship around.
Well, he certainly knows how to grow the economy, and he did that through tax cuts. And I had heard the importance of tax cuts throughout my life, but then Reagan was president when I was young, when I was a kid and a teenager. So I didn't experience in the workforce the economic growth, the economic pie growing the way that it did under Reagan until we saw that with Trump. I would love to see the economic pie grow and the spending come down at the same time, because I think that would unleash something in this country that we haven't seen in decades.
Exactly. And I don't think it's really been effectively done before.
No, I don't think so.
Where you have those massive tax cuts for the working class. That's what I really care about. The working class gets the tax cuts. And then to have the spending decrease, I think it's going to unleash the American economy, and it's going to bring us back into that. I mean, right now people are scared. They're looking at the United States in a position of weakness. And how do we recover from that? And you're exactly right. This isn't complicated.
No.
Well, this is a lot of it's common sense, right? But the ones who have to try to unpretzel themselves are the Democrats, where they try to increase spending and increase taxes, and they destroy your economy. It's what happens we have examples all across the world, and yet they want to still implement those same type of policies here.
Right.
That's what's so scary.
It is. And if socialism fails everywhere it's tried, and yet we seem not to want to learn from others' experiences. Tell me this. Who is your favorite founding father and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've read so many books, and in the past, I would have said Thomas Jefferson, right? Just because of his what he did with the Declaration of Independence, which I think is one of the most beautiful written documents known to man. But I also look at George Washington now in a different light, where he was a man of great humility. His demeanor was very calm, and he was steady. And I have a painting of him crossing the Delaware. It's one of those, charging. What he did by, being the general of the forces, taking on the largest military force and the greatest fighting force known to man, which is Great Britain. And then to assume the presidency, something he wasn't even desiring, and then to take a step back. I mean, it's almost at the level of, a great Roman emperor, right? It was something so unusual that what he did. And I think, he was what was needed at the time. And it was so divine. And it's actually divine that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died on July 4th, 50 years to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I mean, can you imagine that? Yeah. This country is divine. We have a special place. It was the first time that the people imagine what all it took to have the founding fathers in this moment where self-governance, and to see what I'm so disgusted by is to see the Democrats attacking our founding fathers, destroying their statues, trying to replace their names on buildings, removing them from military bases. And we have to honor our past. But to answer your question, I think George Washington is probably that's something I've just recently have come to appreciate more so than, say, some of the other founding fathers in the past.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate your time today. I wish you a lot of luck as you're going through your campaign. And the primary is not until August of 2024, so you've got a lot of months to go. But we need people like you who are willing to fight and to stand up for what's right and to speak truth to power. This is Abe Hamadeh, and I'm Jenny Beth Martin with The Jenny Beth Show. Thanks so much for joining us.
The Jenny Beth Show is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin, produced by Kevin Mooneyhan, and directed by Luke Livingston. The Jenny Beth Show is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, visit teapartypatriots.org.
If you like this episode, let me know by hitting the like button or leaving a comment or a 5-star review. And if you want to be the first to know every time we drop a new episode, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for whichever platform you're listening on. If you do these simple things, it will help the podcast grow, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much.